We're given our graphs. We know that a bunch of points are labeled. For example, on our original graph, we have the point 0, 8, and we have the point 2, -8. Something happens. This is just to help you visualize it. And that point A ends up at -2, 0, and the point B ends up at 0, -8. Now, unlike before when we did these questions, you just had one thing to do, so you could go from one point to another quite easily. Now it's more complicated. And so on Friday, when I showed you that later on we're going to be looking at this in a more complicated way, this is this situation, where what we're going to do is we're first going to look at comparing point A and B. What's the horizontal distance between point A and B? And then comparing our new horizontal distance between our new points A prime and B prime. So if you go from A to B, what has changed horizontally? You've gone up by 2. If you go from A prime to B prime, you also go up by 2. Can you see that? You'll also go 2 to the right. What that tells us, you could say, well, I'd have to multiply x values by 1 in order to keep them the same. That's telling us that there's going to be no horizontal stretch or no horizontal compression. However, when we look at what's happened vertically, when we look at A to B, we start at 8 and go down to -8. So we need to also show the signs here. That would be going down 16. And when we look at A prime to B prime, we start at 0 and go down to -8. We would be going down 8. What would you have to multiply your y values by to go from -16 to -8? You'd have to multiply y by 1/2. So we first figure out in this one, by doing this, you've now figured out that your x values have been multiplied by 1, which you wouldn't have to show anything by that, and your y values by 1/2. If you want to fill things out, you could. You could say, I now know that my x values aren't changing, so this will be 0 and this will still be 2, but my y values now will be 4 and -4. And I'm going to draw those points on my graph temporarily. So I've got 0, 4 and 2, -4. That's what's happened so far. And now we have to take those points and something has to translate to make it match up with -2, 0, and 0, -8. Can you see that the same translations could happen to those black points to match up with A prime and B prime? How would I go from 0 to -2 and from 2 to 0? What would I have to put here? Left or right? And how many? 2 to the left. And to go from 4 to 0 and -4 to -8? How many down do I have to go? 4 down. On the grid, be careful, right? Because on the grid you count 2 spaces and you'll want to say 2. So this is why having us set this up this way, figuring out our vertical and horizontal distances first, gives us a clue. And then once you get the first clue, the second part is easy to see because it's just one arrow. But we couldn't do this all at once to begin with because there was too many things happening. Write an equation in terms of f. So our equation is g of x. So notation-wise, we want to say g of x equals, in terms of f, we've got a 1/2 outside of the function because that's vertical. Then inside the function, we don't have to show the x by 1 because that's not doing anything. Only thing we need to show is 2 to the left. So that'll be an x plus 2. And then finally, outside of the function again, 4 down. So here is the notation for g of x. G of x is our blue graph. It's equal to doing all of this to f of x, or all of that to the red graph. And questions for practice on this one, or question for practice, is number 9.